Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time wickedest woman on YouTube, and welcome back to another video. On this channel, we discuss mysticism, religion, the occult, culture, and everything on the fringes of esoterica. And in this video, I'm gonna just kind of discuss a topic. It's not in my traditional 101 format, because this is something I've wanted to break into and something that I felt was necessary after the video I made a couple weeks ago about mysticism. You don't need to watch that video before this, but if you're unaware of what mysticism is, it might be a good idea. So I will link that in the description box. Because in this video, we're talking about things people get wrong about mysticism, and things people misunderstand. Mysticism is a really broad thing, and it exists in pretty much every religion, tradition, and culture. And I think because of this, people have an idea of mysticism. I think many people, when they think of mysticism, a very specific image pops into their head. The image of, a pious monk meditating for 20 hours. And of course, that is mysticism, obviously, but mysticism is more than that. And mysticism is something that a lot of people can actually engage with. I would say anyone can be a mystic, but mysticism is not for everyone, right? This type of stuff, it's not going to appeal to everyone. And for some people, it is going to be more challenging than others. But anyone who really decides to put in the hard work and devote themselves and discover divinity can absolutely connect to mysticism. There's a really good quote that mysticism is the child of devotion and discipline. And that is something that I completely agree with. If you can connect to these two things, you can absolutely become a mystic and go down this path. So without further ado, here are 10 things that people get wrong about mysticism. The first thing that people get wrong about mysticism is that mysticism and magic are the same thing. So I've discussed magic and ritual extensively on this channel. I've written ritual guides about it. I've even written a book about it, right? I have discussed magic ad nauseum. And I want to make it clear, magic and mysticism are not the same thing. Fundamentally, magic is using your will to enact change, and it exists in many different forms. However, mysticism isn't always this. I will caveat this with sometimes mysticism does fit that definition of magic, but largely mysticism is more about connecting to the divine and gaining gnosis from that interaction. So I would say it's a different thing. You're going to have similar spiritual experience in both of these things. And it's not like you need to choose between one, you can absolutely do both, but the fundamental goal of mysticism is not to enact change, it's to connect to divinity and gain knowledge through connection to divinity. The second thing that people get wrong about mysticism is that mysticism only exists in the Abrahamic traditions. Obviously, the Abrahamic religions have mystic traditions to them. There is Kabbalah within Judaism, there is Christianism in many different forms. There's a lot of different types of Christianism within Christianity, and there's Sufism within Islam. However, that's not the only mystic traditions in the world. Literally every single religion has mysticism to it. When we look at religion, we can divide every religion into two categories within that religion. There is the exoteric and the esoteric. The exoteric is the doctrine, the teachings, the things you do when you are taught, right? The stuff like if you go to a church service you experience. And then there's the esoteric, which is the hidden meaning, the mystical, the underlying level. So let's use this church example again, right? Like the Eucharist at Mass, that would be esoteric, right? And every religion has both of these. Thus, every religion has mysticism within it. It does look different religion to religion, but to be honest, there are similar practices in every religion, right? Meditation exists in every mystic tradition. Contemplation exists in every mystic tradition. Many of these activities that we do exist in many ways, though the specific practices will often vary. There's overlapping everywhere. Fundamentally, I'm a perennialist. That is my theological outlook, which basically means that I believe all religions are different paths with the same mountain. And when we look at what has evolved out of religions, what religions have developed too, we are fundamentally looking at a different interpretation of the same inner tradition. I believe everyone is tapping into that same inner tradition, that same truth, but as we are limited in our perception, because we're humans, we can't understand everything about divinity, we have to filter through our own lenses, be it cultural, be it personal, and that's how we've gotten all these religions. So I think we are all tapping into something that is truthful, and thus, mysticism is in every religion. It's going to look a little different. So obviously, whatever tradition you're part of, you're going to want to look at what the specific mystic traditions are. But mysticism is everywhere. It's not owned by Christianity, Judaism, Islam. It's not. The next thing that people get wrong about mysticism is that mysticism is inherently, metaphysically evil. This is just ridiculous. I hear this a lot from kind of evangelical type Christians, right? They'll make these lists of spiritual practices to avoid, and they'll put all these different forms of mysticism on it. I saw this one list from this woman, and she said mantras, affirmations, and meditations are satanic. Obviously I'm not a Christian, so the term calling things satanic doesn't necessarily I don't know, it doesn't stick with my brain. But what comes from this implication is that it is metaphysically evil. Metaphysical evil is real. I'm not denying that. I've explored that a little bit in some of the stuff I've discussed. But mysticism is not metaphysically evil. Let's think about what mysticism is. Mysticism is getting closer to divinity, connecting to God or gods, whatever your framework is, right? How can that be metaphysically evil? What is evil about seeking out that direct gnosis and tapping into God? If someone has to tell you that that is evil, that is because they want to manipulate you theologically in some way. They want you to not experience God on your own, which honestly, that's toxic and heretical in almost every tradition, right? It's wrong. Also, like, things people who say this do are still kind of mystical, right? Like, in a sense, prayer is sort of part of mysticism. A lot of mystic traditions and techniques actually incorporate these sort of like advanced forms of prayer. Like, there's this idea of contemplative prayer, right? Like, that is a mystic technique, but that is still prayer, right? Like, so even if you're just praying to your God, you're still engaging with mysticism to some degree, and so to say mysticism is inherently metaphysically evil is just kind of silly. The next thing that people get wrong is that mysticism is all about escaping the material world. Now, me saying that might sound a little strange, because when we think of mysticism, we think of ideas such as annihilation, the annihilation of the ego, the dissolution into the oneness and wholeness of God, the return to the source of the point in the circle. But interestingly, it is not all about that. There are actually mystic traditions, particularly those outside of the Western canon, that actually do connect to our bodies, right? Our physicality does have to do with what is beyond us. We are the microcosm of the macrocosm, which what that means, it's the idea of as above, so below, right? Like, our microcosm, our being, is a reflection of something bigger, right? The macrocosm is the big, the microcosm is the small. I'd like to explain to people using astrology, right? Like, if you believe the planets can affect our small lives, that creates a objective relationship between these big and little things. And logically, you could do the reverse. And that's one of the big arguments for the idea of magic existing. But when it comes to like our material bodies, we are still an emanation of the divine. We were created by the divine. We are, in a sense, the divine. We are a reflection of it. I personally believe in this very emanationist worldview where everything kind of emanates down from this point in the circle. And when it comes to us, we are an emanation of divinity. We are a sort of lower octave of divinity for sure. Like, we are not gods. I do not believe we are gods. There are some left-hand path esoteric people who do think we are gods. I don't agree with that, but that is a view that some people hold. I believe that though the divine is part of us. In a sense, there is no part of us that is not of the gods, in my view. But we are not gods, right? But that would mean that even our body has something metaphysical to it. And you can see clear examples of this. In a woman's life, she experiences, provided she's like an adult and not really old or really young, the menstrual cycle. I know the men in my audience are gonna get icked out, so I'm gonna keep this talk really, really short. But that cycle every month, it's the same cycle that the moon goes through every single month. And so by following our natural phases, we can actually learn a lot. And a lot of mystic traditions actually have things related to this. In Islam, when you finish your menstrual cycle, you have to do a series of ablutions or ritual purifications. Judaism has a similar idea, and within various pagan traditions, there are different ideas of different things you're supposed to do based on different times of that cycle. Even within like yoga, our bodies are seen as part of our mystic teaching, because yoga was originally from Hinduism. Yoga in the West has kind of been watered down and simplified and reduced to like stretching exercises, but originally yoga, and it still is in many places, and in certain studios you can still find them. Like in the US, if you want to get into yoga, you can find studios that teach yoga as a spiritual discipline and not just a physical discipline, like they do exist. You have to do some Googling, but you can probably find one in your city or near you, as these postures were actually things that could teach us about the gods, and these movements in and of themselves were a ritual. In Sufism, as an example, there's actually a lot of movement in their mystic practices. So obviously, while you are, connected to something higher than the material, you're still understanding that there is clearly something divine about the material that we can move throughout. The only tradition that I would say completely rejects this is Gnosticism, as Gnosticism is the most anti-material tradition out there. I am not a Gnostic, and most Gnostic mystic traditions are about breaking beyond, but overall, I mean, that's not a belief that is intrinsic to mysticism, and it's one that I actually quite reject for a lot of reasons. In fact, I think there's something really antinomian about claiming you love the divine and then hating what the divine created. There's something, I would say, on the antinomian side. So, I don't know. I think the material is okay and not inherently evil or anything like that. And we can learn a lot of mystic and spiritual truths from our material bodies. The next thing that people get wrong about mysticism is that you need to be a perfect, pious, expert, level 10,000 wizard to engage with mysticism. This is not true. Obviously, certain mystic traditions do want you to have a level of competency with the religion to become a mystic. This does exist in some systems. Some have systemic gatekeeping in place. However, this is not a broad thing. And even within those traditions that have gatekeeping, not every single person who engages with mysticism is the perfect person. I would argue that nobody is. I don't think a single person alive is actually perfect and pious all the time, right? We all have slip-ups, we all make mistakes, we're all growing. And the vast majority of people who engage with mysticism are actually just normal people. They're people like you, they're people like me. They go through their days, they have their jobs, they go to college, whatever it is they're doing with their time, and then they come home and they have that time that they reserve to be with the divine. Obviously, we're interacting with the material world. We're gonna do things that are not perfectly pious. I would say this idea that you need to be some like monk who has never interacted with society ever is kind of silly. And it's historically wrong too. Most of the historic mystics were normal people, and we weren't all high degree monks. If anything, I think mysticism is what can make us high level monks. How are you gonna be like some perfect pious, like popely, saintly person if you're not engaging with the divine on the regular on your own? I don't think that quite makes sense. So I would say not everyone who's a mystic is a saint by any means. I'm certainly not. But through mysticism, we can become more saintly. Also, piety is not the only thing that matters in mysticism as well. Like, piety is something that's stressed in some mystic traditions, but that's not the whole of mysticism. In fact, certain traditions, particularly some in the East, like Tantra, actually reject a lot of the Western ideas of what like a pious mystic is like, and engage with things like sensuality and they explore the metaphysical dimension of things like sensuality in a way that is still mystic. It just is viewing things through a different lens. So it's not all about being the perfect person. Nobody is perfect, and I don't think that this should hold you back. I find a lot of people when they get interested in mysticism develop this like weird imposter syndrome where they're like, oh, I'm not pure enough, I'm not holy enough, I could never be a mystic. And I really want people to sort of throw that idea out of their mind. Because how are you going to be these things that you want to be without understanding this type of stuff to begin with? You should engage with it. And if anything, I think if you are someone who is not pious, someone who struggles with things, like let's say you struggle with addiction, you struggle with depression, you struggle with, like these type of behaviors, right, that are not helping you, that are not in line with your will, and that are not helping you accomplish the great work. I would say you need mysticism more than anyone else, because through these experiences, you can grow, you can develop, and you can sort of understand yourself in a way that helps you become a better person, right? This stuff is going to change you in a good way. And so I would say if you are someone who is unpure, unholy, all that stuff, you need it more. When I first started exploring the occult, I was not in the best place in my life. I've talked about this a few times. I was just not doing well. The reason why I was interested in stuff to begin with is because I wanted to work on myself. I was not happy about where I was in life, and I wanted to change. And so I looked into spirituality, and I back then did a lot of really toxic stuff. I was not, there was stuff that just, it was not okay. And I don't do it now, but if I had not discovered mysticism and discovered the divine in this way, I would still be in those patterns. And so I would say if you're feeling this, I can't be a mystic because I'm struggling, you need it more than anyone else, I would say. So don't let that be a barrier. The next thing I want to talk about is basically a continuation of the previous point, and that is that you do not need to fully renounce the material world to be a mystic. So there are certain traditions where you basically have to, right? If we look at what nuns do, what certain priests do, what monks do, they really do renounce the material world, and they go to live apart from the material world and devote their entire life to their spirituality. Often they even take poverty vows, which is essentially where they vow to not engage with material things, not have money, that type of stuff. However, that's not how all traditions view it. Even within Christianity, interestingly, Orthodox priests and Eastern Catholic priests are actually allowed to get married and have kids, right? Like, even these people in these traditions where we associate, this idea of leaving the world behind, they're still allowed to, have lives, have families. If anything, I think the call to having a normal life can teach you a lot, right? There are actually mystic levels to everything we do, right? If you're a woman becoming a mother, there's a lot of mysticism attached to that. Within neo-paganism, we talk a lot about the mother, maiden, crone cycle. And essentially what that is the life cycle of the woman, right? You're born as a maiden, you live your youth, you're embodying your Diana, and then you become a mother and you have kids and you go through this big initiation that is childbirth, and then you become a crone and you have your Hecate era where you're this wise woman who helps the next generation. That is engaging with the material world, that is engaging with other people, that is engaging with all this stuff. But that is still a deeply mystic experience. As well, I have some of the greatest practitioners I've met are people who have normal jobs and live normal lives. I would say the majority of mystics do live normal lives and engage with society. Also, there are mystic dimensions to a lot of stuff that we engage with, right? Like, you can make talismans and sell them. Is that engaging with the material world? Of course that is. You are engaging with, life. You're selling your stuff, but you are selling people spiritual tools that advance them. If anything, I think one of the things that we learn the longer we go down the path of spirituality is that the mundane and the mystical are not as detached as we think they are. They're not a hard dichotomy. There is mystical dimensions to everything we engage with, everything we do, and everything we see. They're not separate. There is no separation. It is one of the greatest lessons. The next thing I wanted to talk about is that mysticism and Gnosticism are not the same thing. They are not. So Gnosticism is a specific worldview that grew out of a heretical sect of Christianity. And interestingly, Gnosticism gets defined in a number of ways. When I say mysticism is not inherently Gnosticism, I mean that mysticism is not inherently Gnosticism in this reject the material, reject the demiurge type way. I have a YouTube video on Gnosticism if you want to know what it is and the different sects. I guess this is where I think this argument could, make a little bit of sense. Gnosis, the idea within Gnosticism that, spirituality is found through interaction with the gods alone, through gnosis, through personal experience. I mean, that translates to mysticism because mysticism is about personal experience. It is about that personal relationship. So in a sense, I guess I get where this is coming from, but it's an oversimplification. Mysticism and Gnosticism are different things. Gnosticism is a specific tradition with a strong mystic undertone and overtone to it, honestly. It's both an undertone and an overtone. And so most Gnostics are mystics, but that's not the other way around. You know what I mean? And there are Gnostics I've noticed who are just like, they believe in the idea of Gnosticism, they believe in the demiurge, they believe in the monad, but they don't have like a mystical practice. So I would say they're not the same. If you want to define Gnosticism in the broadest sense possible as Gnosticism as finding gnosis and using gnosis as the center of your spirituality, sure, but I don't think that's how most people even define Gnosticism, and I don't think that's how most Gnostics define themselves. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is the idea that you need to join an organization or have a lineage to be a mystic. So for certain traditions, I would say this is true, but even then, it's often a little more complicated than you have to join a group to be a mystic. Many mystics have been solitary throughout history. They have been alone. Because fundamentally, mysticism is what happens alone in the dark with your eyes closed and with God. One famous occultist actually said that one of the greatest problems of the modern world and of society at large, I believe A.O. Spare said this, but I might be quoting it wrong, so don't cite me on that. But they said that the greatest travesty is that when people go into a dark room with their eyes closed or so sound, they think that they're alone and they think that they're bored. That is not true. Mysticism is what happens in private. It is that very close relationship. So even if you join a group or the specific mystic tradition you're interested in requires you to join a group, you're still going to be having a solitary dimension to what you're doing, and you're still going to eventually have to rely on yourself and rely on your God or gods, however you see things. So you don't need to join a group. Most traditions don't require you to join a group. There's a lot of mysticism you can literally watch this YouTube video with and then do tonight, right? You don't need to, wait years and years to get into some specific group. For specific traditions, that is true, but even then for those traditions, there's stuff you should do before you join the group, right? You should learn to meditate, you should learn your mantras, you should learn your scriptures, all that type of stuff. Whatever your tradition mandates, you should be learning before you join that group. So even if you require to join a group for your tradition, there's still more, and you're still gonna have to do stuff alone anyways. So I would say you definitely don't need to rely on some organization to be a practitioner. My final point is one that is definitely going to piss some people off and might make the YouTube algorithm mad at me. Please do not demonetize me, YouTube. Please do not demonetize me. And that relates to psychedelics. So, psychedelics come up when you talk about mysticism pretty quickly. A lot of people who are into psychedelics are really into psychedelics. It's like a whole personality trait. They love their psychedelics. They credit all their spiritual experiences to the psychedelics. It's a big thing for them. And I will say, there is a spiritual value to psychedelics and other entheogenic drugs. They have a place. There are many traditions where you approach a shaman and psychedelics are involved. It's typically actually done in a way that modern psychedelic journeying is not done. It's done where the shaman takes it and then tells you what he sees. Now that's kind of been flipped. There's a whole industry of people traveling to do these psychedelic experiences that there's a lot of weird stuff going on with that. There's some issues with that. Not getting into that. Other people have discussed it ad nauseum. But even individually, there are traditions where you individually do administer this stuff, or you use things mugwort, which is not a full psychedelic, but does have psychoactive effects. There's things like drinking blue lotus infused wine was a big thing in ancient Egypt, and modern Egyptian polytheists still do that, right? You can make that at home and stuff like that. And so that stuff does change your, how you're psychologically functioning. As well, there's ceremonies related to plants like kava and kratom, which, they mess with you. They're not full on psychedelics, but they do stuff. So this stuff does exist. Plant medicine, it's a thing. It's a thing that people do, and it's a thing that can cause really great spiritual growth. It can cause you to change, it can cause you to awaken, it can cause you to unlock things. There is value to it. However, you do not need to do that to be a mystic, and I would say a lot of mystic traditions don't recommend it. It's not a thing that everyone is meant to do. There are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't, and there's a lot of traditions that, you know, don't involve it at all. Mysticism is not doing psychedelics. If anything, I would say my one big hot take on psychedelic use is I think it can be valuable. I think it can. However, you should not use it as a crutch. I think some people who get really into psychedelic and entheogen stuff, they use it as a crutch, and that becomes the basis of their practice instead of, you know, the stuff that they actually need to be doing. And it becomes actually kind of toxic and bad for them. So psychedelics have value, but they're not everything, and they don't exist in every tradition. Not every tradition does it. Mysticism is not about getting lit. And even if you are using these things for your mystic practice, you're using them to do like open spiritual gains. It's not just to have fun. You're doing it for a reason. So I would say it's even separate from recreational use. Anyways, that's all I really wanted to say as my big mysticism misconceptions. These are the things I see going around the most. If you know any other misconceptions, pop them in the comment box. I'd be curious what you guys think I missed, because there are certainly more things that people get wrong than this little list. So thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you are subscribed for 93 days, you'll be your holy guardian angel, and you will never need to do mysticism again. And if that doesn't happen, do not call the Better Business Bureau on me. I swear it is totally true. Anyways, I'm Georgina Rose. If you want to support me, that would mean a lot. I really appreciate it. Patreon is how I keep the lights on. So if you join my Patreon, you can get all sorts of things. You get all these videos early. You get an extra video every month. You get my ritual guides, which have been over 20 pages of rituals that relate to the esoteric things happening that month. I put a lot of work into them. And I also do personal private one-on-one consultations if you join my higher tier. So there's a lot going on there. I also host the podcast, The Postmodern Iconoclast. I do upload it to this YouTube channel, so you can literally just go to my channel and watch it. They're long form, they're like an hour, and I bring on a guest every other week, and we discuss topics related to mysticism, culture, religion. They are a little bit more broad than the videos on my channel. Like, they don't just focus on occult practices. They talk about a lot of things. It's broader. It's everything kind of including and adjacent. And I've brought on some really different voices who have, you know, a lot to say that I find rather interesting, and I hope you do too. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Telegram, Odyssey, Twitch. I stream once a week. Most weeks I have off weeks, but most weeks I do it. And everywhere. I'm really on every platform you can possibly find. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good day, night, mid-afternoon, mid-morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Goodbye.